Yeah. If you recall, last year on first day Pesach, I spoke about how our religion, the Jewish religion, is unique in how we not only care for ourselves, not only how we care for others, but how we are commanded to and exhibit in our practices, never to gloat or be happy at anyone's suffering at any time. And as I explained, during the Seder, for example, we remove 1 drop of wine from our cups when we recite each of the 10 plagues. Last night we removed 2. One for those who we do not gloat over, our enemies, and the other for, unfortunately, sadly, for the hostages who are still in captivity. And even though we benefited from the plagues in Egypt, others, the Egyptians, suffered. And so we diminish our own joy accordingly. Now, in addition, during the last 6 days of Pesach, so you'll notice today and tomorrow, then there's going to be a switch, we don't recite a full Hallel in the morning. We go from a full Hallel on the first 2 days to a partial Hallel on the rest of the holiday. The question is why? Well, because the Egyptians died at the Red Sea. And as much we are glad that we survived, we do not express any displeasure that others had to die because of it. So tell me, what other religion teaches us such an important lesson? What other religion, even if it otherwise preaches such tolerance, actually puts it into practice in its liturgy or rituals? Got news for you, there's none that I know of, so perhaps you know, but I don't, so you can enlighten me at the Kiddush. These practices that were instituted by our sages almost 2,000 years ago are also seen today. Many innocent Gazans have lost their lives in the recent war. And unlike our enemies who gloat and they cheer and they shoot rifles in the air, they give candy and they give cakes and whatever, when Israelis die, what do? We provide more humanitarian aid. We apologize for our mistakes. We don't hide it. What other religion, what other country does this? But have you ever wondered, have you ever stopped to think for a second, where did we get this idea of compassion for others from? Yes, of course, it comes from the Torah. We are constantly commanded to be compassionate towards others. That's a given. But why and where did it start, and what is its connection specifically to Pesach? Now, as you know, in the Torah, the holiday of Pesach, we are celebrating, in English, what do people call it? What do people call Pesach?
Passover.
Easter? I never heard in all my years Pesach being called Easter. Well, no, I'm referring to Passover. It's known as Passover. But what about if that is a mistake? What about if the word Passover is not supposed to be? So let me share something with you. According to the original Jewish sources, Passover is far from the most accurate translation of the holiday's name. And as it turns out, recovering a lost earlier understanding of the holiday's real name also helps us better understand its true meaning. So where does the name Pesach that we call Passover come from? Now, in the biblical account of the Exodus, Moses tells the Israelites to sacrifice a lamb and mark their homes with its blood so that they will not be harmed by the 10th plague, which kills Egypt's firstborns. Firstborn males, by the way. How does the Torah describe this sacrifice? It says, V'shachatu et ha-Pasach. V'shachatu et ha-Pasach. And after that is done, the Torah says, and I'm going to say it in English, for when the Lord goes through to smite the Egyptians, he will see the blood on the lintel and on the doorpost, and the Lord will Pasach, not Passover like everybody says, Pasach on the door, and not let the destroyer enter and smite your home. In Hebrew, Upasach Adonai al hapetach. That's what it says. The Torah goes on to direct the Israelites to commemorate this moment by making a regular sacrifice, thus establishing the holiday that Jews now observe. And when the children ask you, what do you mean by this rite? You shall say to them, it is the Pesach sacrifice to the Lord, because he, Pasach, he Pasach on the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when he smote the Egyptians, but he saved our houses. Okay, so now we know where it comes from. Let's try and unpack it. So you can see how Passover, would be a very easy way to translate the words for Pesach. Pesach, in the verses that I just shared. And in fact, that is how, listen to this, that is how St. Jerome, the Christian author of the Vulgate, in the 5th century Latin translation of the Bible, rendered the word Passover. Thus, the holiday of Passover as we now call it. So every time you use that word Passover, you're actually referring to the Christian author of the Vulgate of the 5th century. But that is not how traditional Jewish translators and commentators rendered the word. Yes, St. Jerome did. For example, the Targum Onkelos, written in Aramaic, was the most widely used translation of the Torah used by Jews way back when, because many Jews didn't read or speak Hebrew. Even today, Onkelos, if you look at any traditional Chumash, you'll see the Onkelos is printed alongside the Hebrew text. Simply put, Onkelos reflects how ancient Jews understood the Bible. And Onkelos did not think Pesach meant Passover in any way, shape, or form. Here's how Onkelos translates Exodus, which I read earlier. He translates it: God will appear to strike the Egyptians, and he will see the blood upon the lintel and upon the doorpost, and God will be compassionate on your threshold and not permit the destruction to enter your houses to smite. And this is how Onkelos translates Exodus 23. When your children ask you, what do you mean by this rite, Pesach, you shall say it is the sacrifice of compassion before God. Who had compassion upon the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt? When he struck the Egyptians, he spared our houses. In other words, in this very traditional Jewish understanding, Pesach does not mean Passover in any way, shape, or form. It means compassion. And thus the holiday of Passover is a celebration of divine compassion. This understanding is also reflected by Rashi, who translates Upasach as will have compassion. Only then does he add, one can also say he skipped. After all, Rashi was undoubtedly familiar with the Vulgate translation and wanted to connect the two. So I will tell you that many other traditional Jewish commentaries also reflect this tradition. The Greek Septuagint translates Pesach not as Passover, but as protect. And the word Pesach has parallels in Arabic as well that also refer to compassion. And the implications of this alternative translation are significant. For one, it gives a greater moral understanding to the observance of Pesach. Rather than the simple act of omission, namely the passing over of Jewish homes, the holiday actually celebrates a deliberate act by God of compassion toward an enslaved people, and calls on us to emulate that divine conduct ourselves in our lives for all times. Second, passing over, if you think about it, is an incidental act. I passed over, or it passed over. A sacrifice of compassion, on the other hand, is not. It is a very deliberate act. And that is why when we commemorate Pesach, we commemorate compassion, And we remind ourselves that without it, none of us would be here. But remember something else. Having compassion does not mean that we turn the other cheek. Having compassion does not mean that we don't fight back to defend ourselves when we are attacked. Having compassion does mean that we must do what we can to rid ourselves of those who have no compassion on us or seek to destroy us. So, for if we do misplace our compassion, then we will not be around to continue to show compassion in the future. Passover is our greatest holiday in terms of recalling our history and dreaming of our future. And yes, we must teach our children. We said it in the Haggadah, we must remember the Exodus. And yes, we must clean and we must kasher and we must prepare. But it is also a holiday filled with many other messages and lessons. And perhaps the most important message of all is that it's a holiday that reminds us in so many ways that we must remember those who are less fortunate than us. We must remember the poor person and make sure he has the 4 cups of wine to drink and the matzah. We must remember the homeless and invite them into our homes for meals. We must remember those living under oppressive regimes with no religious freedom, who cannot observe this holiday, who cannot obtain even 1 piece of matzah. We must remember that we were once slaves, that we were often oppressed, and therefore take action so that today nobody lives under those conditions. And finally, we must remember not to gloat over the suffering of others. We must learn to have compassion and feel compassion for all of God's children, even those who chase after us and want to destroy us. We must not let them destroy us. And Pesach reminds us that that won't happen. But we should always feel sadness over the loss of life and find a way of incorporating that sadness into our rituals. And this is a message we should transmit to the rest of the world. And that is one more thing that we can learn, that the world can learn from us. We should also use this lesson as a reminder that Judaism is not a parochial or particularistic religion which is only concerned about Jews. We are concerned about everyone, all humanity. And if that doesn't send a message to the rest of the world, what Judaism is really about, then I'm afraid nothing will. And so this Pesach season, may we continue to care for those less fortunate. May we continue to pray for those who are held hostage and those who are injured in this war. And do what we can. Do what we can for them under these trying conditions, and thus may we merit the coming of the Mashiach, which will bring shalom, which will bring peace for all Israel and for all the world. Chag Sameach.